Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
It pains me greatly to know that apparently I share a true passion for hockey sticks along with Corey Perry because he's in the middle of a game actually trying to show Brock Boeser the specs on his stick. I respect it, but it had to be Corey Perry.
The listeners, do you want to see something cool? Brad, what was the stick he was holding up exactly?
I think it was Josh Anderson's Vapor. Oh, he might be onto a jet speed now. I can't remember, but
sicko. Weird. But I do respect you for having that. Your brain's wired in such a way where you pick up on those equipment details. I was watching that game last night and I immediately, I was burst out laughing and I was like, I can't believe we have to hand it to Corey Perry, but that's hysterical.
It's an all-time troll.
He's matured as a player because I think Corey Perry from maybe even a year ago would have just cross-checked Brock Boeser right in the teeth.
Yeah, that stick's being pushed forward hard. The pure hatred and drama and big, bold letters underlined irrationality coming out of not just fan bases, but players and coaches from these playoffs is just, it is absolute theater. And we talked about this last episode. This second round has been just so much better for that entertainment. Everyone is losing their minds over the smallest things, the biggest things. Stuff is being litigated at, breakneck light speed 100 times over. Blood feuds are being developed between fan bases that aren't going to go away for a decade. This is what playoff hockey is all about. Stupidity like that's just capped off and compressed into this microcosm that is Corey Perry holding a stick up to Brock Boeser's teeth with his weird sociopath wide-eyed stare looking forward. It is fun watching this as a spectator because we went from, complaining about the referees for the last 10 Red Wings games. Oh, these calls have such big impacts to now just sitting on our high horses saying, oh God, these fan bases are being so irrational about the refs and they don't actually influence this decision or that decision. But I am excited to jump back into what is, I think, most aptly described as a hockey mosh pit someday. It'd be nice. We want to be irrational too.
It's truly fun and maddening at the same time because you know how you'll get asked questions, hypothetical questions on the internet, without research. What could you write a 2,000-word essay on, on the spot or present in front of a large room of people? And for me, it's how the refs screwed Detroit in 2013 in Game 6 against Chicago.
Oh, why are we doing that?
I'm just saying, I can get down in the mud with everybody else in this one, and we're all the better for it.
Do we want to talk about, holding two sticks in your hand and that kind of stuff against Pittsburgh as well? Those missed calls.
What about automatic suspensions getting rescinded?
Yeah. We have a lot of that. I wish we could just be like Evan, just no thoughts behind our eyes.
Yes.
You here, buddy?
Oh yeah, ready to rock.
And I know how opinions change because obviously in the Boston-Florida series, goaltender interference has been a big thing where everybody gets on and says the same joke. And I've talked about this at length. Oh, what is goaltender interference? It's actually really black and white. If you go by Down Goes Brown's reference guide that he made to what it is, it's 95% accurate. He can almost predict it all. However, if the Red Wings were involved, I'm throwing that book in the trash.
No. Because the definition of any subjective call is whatever is most supportive of your argument. And by your, I mean yours, Brad, yours, Evan, or mine, as we talk about it on the show. And that's what I think the rule book should say. In all seriousness, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, all the drama of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to be talking about Detroit picking 15th overall and just framing around what you can expect for Steve Yzerman to look for in that pick. What kind of player can they get? Are they going to repeat by picking a Dylan Larkin like they did in the past? Are they going to get a player even of Kasper's quality or Edvinsson's quality or, compared to other higher picks that they've had? And also, what about trading the pick? It's not really a conversation that we've had so far, but it's in play for teams in this position. We'll be giving you an update on the Grand Rapids Griffins as well as the Portland Winterhawks, as Nate Danielson is looking towards potentially a miracle to get them back in it, or a move to Grand Rapids to close out his season. Also, the World Championships, our prospect profile for this episode, which is going to be one who's had a bit of discussion around him recently, so I think it's a really good one to tie into our what to expect at 15th overall pick. And then a mess of NHL news, most of it surrounding the playoffs, a little bit about Mark Messier's Leadership Award, the coaching carousel, and more. Before all that, I want to let you know that this podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support the show and join the so-called Dub Club, you get access to some really great benefits like our Patreon exclusive Discord, our bonus overtime episodes, which record and post right after these main ones. We answer any questions that didn't make the main show. We let loose, have fun, talk about hockey, not hockey, our lives, just kind of, shoot the breeze, all that good stuff. You're also automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we gave away 2 tickets to every Red Wings home game for the past 2 seasons, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Also, as a little teaser, Expected by Whom, their newest episode, that's a show within our little network here that we produce, their next episode that's going to post on Friday morning has a really, really fantastic guest that we're excited for you guys all to hear. So give them a listen. That is brought to you by Prashant Iyer and Sean Shapiro. Okay, let's get into it. The Red Wings picked 15th overall, and I'm sensing, based on discussion around who the Red Wings should take, like there's nothing wrong with wanting high-end players to fall. Like you look at guys like Catton, and you're like, I hope he's there for the Red Wings at 15. And we've talked on previous episodes, Brad, you made the point that there are a lot of defensemen and there are a lot of defense-needy teams ahead of Detroit, which could push high-end offensive players or players with at least some high-end offensive talents down the board. But where do you fall on this take that I have? The expectations are a little unrealistic because we are so used to Detroit drafting 4th, 6th, 9th in that range, where I don't think it should be. I think we should be paying more attention to the fact that you might not have the option to draft a player with a high-end skill set by 15. Yes or no?
No, but not for the reason you think. This is a very normal draft, and you're going to probably get very normal value for 15. The reason why I don't think the mindset shifts dramatically, specifically from the last 2 drafts where the Red Wings were picking, is the Red Wings hit this window where they were picking high in underwhelming drafts. I think a lot of the talent that's going to be available around 15 is going to be similar to Marco Kasper and Nate Danielson and what was available there, and Axel Sandin Pellikka. You're either going to have that quote-unquote Red Wings type, that safe-ish 200-foot player with a little bit of offense, or a prospect with a high upside, but a bigger risk attached to it. And I think that's a lot of what we're likely, and I need to emphasize that, likely to be looking at here if that run of defensemen goes as we expect it will, and not even us, as a lot of experts expect it to.
There are going to be players of that ilk that have that high-end upside. I agree. But people are going to be saying, like, why don't you just look for who could be the next Wyatt Johnson or something to that effect? And I know that's easier said than done, but how, like you say, it's a normal draft. How much of that is actually there around that pick?
Traditionally, 15th overall, you don't get a Dylan Larkin. If you walk away with a good second line player, you're generally doing well for that spot. We've talked, because even into the pick 20s, we look at, or even late first round, I should say, we look at Joe Veleno and what he's become, and he was a first round pick, 30th overall. And he obviously hasn't hit the ceiling we hoped he would hit. But 30th overall to what Joe Veleno's turned into is about average value. Like, we can still be happy with that pick relative to where it was. Now, every draft breaks down differently, and it just takes one guy to fall. Like Pasternak went in the 20s for the Bruins, and I don't think a lot of people thought he was going to get that far. It happens. But it's going to come down to that question of, how does the board break? What's your acceptable amount of risk? And what is your biggest need?
That last point is what is your acceptable amount of risk, I think is especially pertinent here. I don't want to spoil too much of the Brandsegg-Nygard conversation because he's our prospect profile for today. But, talk about Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, there was a highlight reel going around for him. And I mentioned online that I was like, he's one of the guys that I'm high on for the Red Wings if he is there for them, one of their potential picks. I really like Michael Brandsegg-Nygard. You mentioned in a previous episode, you think that he has some production that would make him a worthy pick around that 15 range and one of the most well-rounded players in the draft. And there's a big chorus of people who are like a hard no on Brandsegg-Nygard because he doesn't fit that model of swing on high-end upside, which, full disclosure, is what all three of us advocated for last episode. So I'm not disparaging anyone who is a hard no on it. It's just my thinking is that might be, on balance, the best move that you can make. Like, effort and hustle doesn't mean lack of production. And if you have a guy who has, one facet of their game or a couple facets of their game that have high-end potential, you still have to take the calculation into consideration of what's the actual likelihood that this guy's going to pan out. The scouts aren't just there to say, yes, this guy's a great skater, awesome edge work, good work down low, outlet passes are awesome, not so good at transporting the puck down the ice. It's not just what they do. They also have to inform on what's the likelihood that this player is actually going to translate into the NHL. And I would wager that that's not even a hot take. That's the hardest part of the game. Who's going to translate? So it's very often that you have prospects who just have more compete or have less perceived upside who end up being the better NHLers over the course of their careers over guys who have high-end, shooting or really high-end skating, or maybe they're stick handling, or they think the game really well, but it just doesn't all get put together. So for me, I think it's fair to consider a Brandsegg-Nygard or an all-around type player if you want to consider him against and I'm not opening that can of worms today. It's a much bigger conversation that needs more time and consideration, but say a Trevor Connolly, who is actually, he's not even a great example because he's just a really high-end player, but has a lot of questions of can the person make it to the NHL? So the risk calculation is big.
Yeah, because that is still an example of risk. It's not a talent or translatability risk there. On talent, he's a top 10 pick in this draft all day. But how strong do you believe your organization is to quash any issues that might arise with him? How good is your PR team? Because the backlash is coming. And people, when we talk about these high-end swings, they pigeonhole it into a type. And I always want to caution, don't get hung up on a type. Like last year, it was the Zach Benson, conversation. The Red Wings themselves could argue they swung on upside when they picked Kasper and when they picked Danielson, even though us included pegged them more as 200-foot safe all-around picks because we didn't think the offensive upside going into the NHL would be that substantial. But it's always important to remember the context when we're talking about upside, because the question with Kasper was a little more cut and dry. He's playing up levels and he's only produced so much, and is that just a result of playing at a tougher league? Whereas Danielson, his production wasn't great, and the question was, well, he played on a garbage team with guys who couldn't score. Was that the risk there and the offensive upside being higher? Now, you do have your more prototypical upside swings in this draft. A guy like Michael Haig, a guy like Cole Yzerman if he slips, even Berkeley Catton to a degree because of his size, that's still a risk. Whereas a guy like Nygard, are you betting that because he's playing in a men's league, his production would be higher if he was in junior? Now, he's in the Allsvenskan, not the SHL, unlike Kasper, but it's a conversation that could be had and an argument that could be made saying, I am taking the upside pick here because if he was playing against juniors right now, he'd be 1.5 points per game. And where would you go if that was his production? Unless you actually watch the tape and or if you really buy into the analytics, you could go either way on that one. And we'll all fall on our own opinions on certain guys. But just because you look at a guy like Seneke or Haig, where like their offense is their calling card because they're just dominating junior competition, it doesn't mean the guy's playing in the Allsvenskan, the SHL, the KHL, wherever. You don't have that context of, but if they were playing junior, right? How would it look? So just keep that in mind.
Well, that's why I think this draft is particularly interesting for the Red Wings, because they've already taken those quote-unquote high floor, complete 200-foot guys in Danielson and Kasper. So what the Red Wings do at 15, if they choose to pick at 15, really will be an interesting play to see. Do they go again with another one of those guys? Does somebody fall who has high upside but maybe has an unrefined game in other aspects? This draft will be extremely interesting for the Red Wings. And I think a lot of it might happen on the draft floor as teams are picking and as the board sort of starts to shape out.
And we'll see it in a giant warped spherical view in Vegas.
That's right.
One last point before we talk about what Evan alluded to here, which is potentially trading the pick, is we have a tendency in prospect discussion and analysis in the fan base in general. People in general just like buckets and categories for things because it makes it simple to dissect and digest, and it makes it easier to categorize and understand in your brain. And I think that's well and good when you discuss prospect archetypes or the kinds of players that you get. But you have to understand this is a game of really fine margins at this point, especially with these prospects who are still developing. And you have to be careful to not lose the nuance in a situation. I'll use Nate Danielson as an example. Brad just told us what the question was with Nate Danielson, which is when at the time he was drafted, and even as we were and everyone was scouting him, which is that he's a great 200-foot player, does all these things that we know he does well. The offensive production isn't there, even though the skill set looks to be what gives. And it could be a couple things. It's a question of, are his teammates just not converting? Is it that he's just like, whatever size and hustle and everything else, and maybe the teams he's playing, that's what's allowing him to succeed against his peers, and he's not actually going to translate as a higher end offensive player? It could have been a lot of different things. And right now, based on his year that he's had with Portland, it seems to be that he was just on a terrible team, because look how he's excelled offensively with Portland. And then you look back, and it's important to not have considered Nate Danielson as a, no offense prospect. Like it's not just you're all hustle, no offense, or no hustle and all skill and offense. Like there's a lot of in-betweens, and it's not just the outcomes that can show up on like a spectrum of results, but the players in their development and, what makes them is you can't just put them in 2 or 3 simple categories. So that's something, just like a small thing that I think would be good to qualify these conversations with pretty regularly, because we all like comparables. I hate them. But everyone wants a comparable. Everyone wants a type A, B, C, D, and it's just not that simple. All right, off my soapbox, pick 15, where the Red Wings are in the rebuild, what Steve Yzerman is looking for, what the team needs. Do you consider trading the pick, and is there, an avenue that strikes you as a really good one to go down in terms of trading the pick?
Yeah, of course. There's always the option to trade the pick. I'd trade first overall for the right offer. The boring answer is yes, but for what? And basically, when you're thinking about trading a pick of this value, which is still a very good pick, the main conversation that you have to have in your mind is the certainty in the player you're getting, combined with their age, thus contract status, relative to the risk of drafting an unknown, because that player is going to come in cheaper for 3 years. They could be better. They could be worse. There's a lot of risk attached to it, but there's a lot of savings attached to it. The name that always has been jumping to my head for this pick specifically right now, the circumstance around the NHL, would be Trevor Zegras. Is trading 15th overall for Trevor Zegras worth it?
Yes.
Yes. Almost certainly yes. Why? Because we know he can produce 50 to 60 points in the NHL. He's on a reasonably, we'll call it half-decent deal right now with a bit of term, and his next contract might not be crazy, but you know what he is, and you know he's a type of player this team is sorely lacking. Are they likely to get a player of his caliber at 15? Probably not. So it is worth losing out on the ELC years. It is worth giving up the pick because there's a lot of certainty there and a direct need. Whereas if you were shopping around like a hypothetical reclamation project, let's say a Capo Caco, not that anybody thinks he's going to be any good. I'm just using him as an example. No, you're not trading 15th overall for that risk of a guy who hasn't yet panned out in the NHL. I'd rather take the risk on the prospect who's going to have 3 years of an ELC and is a lot younger and will have more team control, right? To me, it makes no sense to swing on those what-if guys. I want a certainty, but at the same point, you're trading 15th overall for a 28, 29-year-old right now. I don't even care who. Are you? Probably not. Right? Like, it would have to be a superstar on a good contract. Otherwise, it's probably not going to help your rebuild all that much.
Yeah, because you have to consider what's your actual window to winning. And there could be some paths. You don't want to rule it out completely, but you're right. It's a much narrower lane.
Yeah, if Edmonton all of a sudden says, we're not re-signing Draisaitl, he's on the market, and you have to include 15 in a package to get him, of course. Like, we're talking about a guy who's a top 5 player in the league. You don't even think twice about that. But if you're thinking a half-decent second-line center, maybe a good first-line winger, but let's say Jake Gensel was locked up long-term right now, you're not doing that. That's not going to help you in your cup window, even though you know how good Jake Gensel is, right?
Okay, I think I fall on the same side.
Because if you're going to pay a 30-year-old $8.5 million for 8 years,
you
right?
have to pay the money too.
It's not just the player and the age. It's 30-year-olds who are legitimately good aren't cheap against the cap.
I just watched Jake Gensel and I'm like, this is a good player, man. Too many people wrote this guy off.
He's so good. Crosby. He's so good, but he's 30.
By the time Detroit's could make most use of his abilities, he's not going to have the same abilities. Something else that people lose sight of, because the NHL's boring and prospects and picks don't move around as much as I think they should, is that after you pick a prospect, if they don't just fizzle out, let's say they strike a really good core right away, like think about, and I'm not advocating to move this guy, I cannot wait to watch him in the winged wheel, but think about Carter Mazur. From the moment he was drafted, he has just succeeded and succeeded and succeeded. That prospect has a ton of value. A prospect still has a lot of value that's almost unfairly assigned to them if things are going positively, because they can look at that player and say, yeah, that is a potential top 6 winger, or that's a potential top 4 defenseman. We know the statistics, we know the numbers. They don't all shake out that way. Look at Brandstrom coming over to Ottawa in the deal for Mark Stone. We were all like, a lot of people actually thought, Brandstrom's a really great defenseman and that's a really good get for Ottawa. Turned into nothing. But
Peyton Krebs really hasn't lit the world on fire in the Eichel trade either.
And they did a really great job of drumming up his value by saying, no, we're not trading him. No, we're not trading him. Vegas is just so good at this, man. They're so good at this whole NHL thing. But they drummed up the value and they held him back until the very last second. And, everyone's eyes were googly over these prospects. And they could have worked out and they would have seemed really smart by Buffalo or Ottawa.
You mean to tell me a prospect that went to Ottawa didn't pan out? My God.
I thought for sure Eric Brandstrom was the next Erik Karlsson. What happened?
But in all seriousness, I think prospects have, for a window there, a disproportionate amount of value. And that's also something you have to consider when you take the player with the pick rather than moving the pick, is you have an opportunity to trade them. Now, it seems like no one other than Vegas is making these trades with these prospects, and sometimes it will burn you. Sometimes you're going to trade a good prospect who will turn into a good player, and you're like, well, then that's the deal I made. But statistically speaking, a lot of these prospects who are good now aren't going to be good in the NHL.
I think my opinion on this question of if the Red Wings will trade the pick or not, my opinion of the draft is it's highly variable after the first pick, which means, maybe there will be lots of trades. But that also means to me that teams are going to probably have their guy available to them.
Yeah, it's just
and they're going
the
to hold their
goes.
pick.
Yeah.
So I have a answer there.
No. You?
Never.
Fence sitter Evan? Say it ain't so.
So hypothetically, if forwards start to fall, I'm moving up. If it shakes out where there's a lot of left-handed defensemen hanging around, nobody who has that high potential sitting there, I think the Red Wings would be comfortable, or I would be comfortable moving back. Obviously, it depends on what teams are willing to give up to get pick 15, but I think there's so many guys that could go from 2 to 17 in this draft. I've seen no consensus on a lot of the picks. So for the Red Wings, I think it's going to be a read and react type type day on the draft floor.
That last point there is, let's say you move back from the pick. We talked about trading the pick for players because obviously the Red Wings have made a move to try to get better more immediately, which worked for them this past season, even if they just missed the playoffs. It also could be that they move back and just take more picks. And that, to me, seems a bit like moving against the current. Like, it wouldn't make the most sense, but it's not crazy to do. You just think, Detroit's already had so many draft picks and they already have so many prospects that are going to need to go somewhere eventually. So the thought of like reloading with more second round picks or whatever it might be doesn't strike you as the sexiest option, but it's still an option and it's generally good practice to do if you know your guy will be available later.
Yeah, there's about 12 guys in this draft that I would say the Red Wings have to pick if one of them is available at 15. Now, based on consensus rankings, a lot of mock drafts, it's more likely than not none of them are getting to 15. So I'm much higher in the camp of you have a million B and C level prospects, trade however many of them you want, trade whatever picks outside of the first round you want to move up and get one of those. If Catton or Yzerman or even a Yakimchuk or a Perek fall out of the top 10, pick up the phone. Like, that's the better option. You need a game breaker, and you're not likely to get one at 15, but there will almost certainly be a couple available at picks 11, 12, possibly 13. Like, get on the phone and swing. Like, do I think Berkeley Catton is going to be Braden Point? No, as we've talked about at length, prospects often don't hit the ceilings that are referenced. More often than not, they do not reach max value. But his ceiling is that. And the Red Wings could desperately use that. So if he is one of the cases that hits, you go for it. Like a guy like Brandsegg-Nygård. Is his ceiling that high? No, of course not. Will he be a good NHL player? Yeah, almost certainly. But the Red Wings have the world of guys like that, right? Even though I really, really like the player, you're not trading up for him. And if you add him to your system, is it changing the outlook of your organization? No. But if you get an Yzerman, a guy who could maybe score 30, 40 goals on the regular, that changes the outlook of your future. Berkeley Catton could be your second line center for 10 years. Does that change the outlook? Yeah, absolutely. Zane Perek could be Erik Karlsson. Does that change the outlook? Yeah, absolutely. So I'm in a camp of, I'm with Evan. Go up and get your guy. And if you're sitting there at 15 and you have this pool of 10 players of, yeah, we think they're going to be pretty good, but we don't think they're going to be anything special. Yeah, trade back. Take whatever one falls to you then. It's just I don't even think the Red Wings need more picks. It's just a value play.
Okay. More on that will come as the rankings and the consensus thoughts continue to shake out. But let's move on here to some quick updates on a Red Wings prospect of note. That's Nate Danielson. The Portland Winterhawks are down 3-0 in their WHL Finals series, which is unfortunate for those of us who have wanted to see more Nate Danielson content. As I've said, all Red Wings fans are Portland Winterhawks fans right now, and the series isn't over. It's not over. But it seems to be that Nate Danielson is doing his damnedest, but the whole team around him isn't really following suit, and it's not been a lot of time during that series where they've looked like a team that can take control and come back, being 3 games down. So, working under the hypothetical, if Portland loses in any fashion, can Nate Danielson join the Grand Rapids Griffins right now? And the answer is yes. They have that option. He can go over. The Red Wings bring him in, and he can, as you've seen with other players who have signed and then they have an immediate tryout with the Griffins, he's eligible. He's eligible as per the NHL CHL agreement. There's nothing holding him back. We've known that once his season ends in the WHL/CHL, he is eligible to come over and play pro hockey in the AHL or the NHL, obviously. So, going to ask an obvious question here. Do we want to see that for Nate Danielson?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. 1,000% yes. And not for nothing either. We know he's had a good preseason in camp with the Red Wings already. We know there's a couple other forwards already in Grand Rapids who probably are pretty decent candidates to get a spot on the Red Wings next year that Danielson will be competing with. If he goes to Grand Rapids and gets 5 to 10 games, like second, third round playoff games, meaningful games, and he does reasonably well, like doesn't even blow the barn doors off, but like keeps up, trust me when I say it will ease the Red Wings brass mind a ton if he has a good camp again next year.
Yeah.
Like he held his head above water in AHL playoff games, yeah, we're not as worried about him transitioning to pro as they otherwise would be coming straight out of juniors into camp.
Well, it helps also potentially answer some of the free agency conversations and strategy the Red Wings are going to have, because Nate Danielson goes to Grand Rapids, looks really good, and they're thinking very high chance he makes the team, or another player on the Grand Rapids Griffins will make this team. That helps shape what you're going to do in free agency. They'll be okay losing Daniel Sprong. They won't go looking for a replacement because here comes Nate Danielson, here comes Carter Mazur, here comes Marco Kasper, whoever it may be. I think more looks is always better than not, because it's just going to help determine what your strategy is going into training camp next year.
In general, I think like unless a prospect has been dealing with a nagging injury or they've just played insanely way too much hockey because of international play and things like that, like those are the questions that can make you think, okay, let's dial it back and let's give them the summer to rest and train and rebuild or whatever. But Nate Danielson plays in the Western Hockey League, which of the three leagues in the CHL is probably the one that's closest to being the most physically ready for the NHL, if there is one. It's still a big step, but you know, if he wants to jump into AHL/NHL hockey, he'll be more physically prepared. And yeah, for the reasons you both stated, getting those looks is going to be big. I really like the point, Brad, of if you go from really great camp last season, which if he made the team, you could not have said boo about it. That's how good he was, to does well with the Griffins and then has another good camp. You're running out of reasons to send him back down. If you send him back down, you're legitimately just saying, hey, we're taking too many of Grand Rapids' good players. We don't necessarily need Nate Danielson next year, and so we're going to keep him down there, which I wouldn't inherently agree with, but that's the only justification if it plays out with like great camp, Griffins audition, and then another great camp coming up this fall.
Yeah, a preview. If he has a good stint with the Griffins this year and then has a good camp with the Red Wings and they still send him down, the term bullshit will be used a lot on this podcast.
This year, it was understandable. We were mostly just impressed that Nate Danielson even made it a conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is hard because, again, as Evan alluded to, like they brought in a lot of free agents this past year and the year before that took up those spots who are actual NHL players, and he still made it a conversation. All right, very quickly here, the Grand Rapids Griffins were on break there for a little bit, but their Central Division Final Series starts tonight in about an hour and 15 minutes from the time of recording here, 8 p.m. against Milwaukee. That series starts. So much like we are all Portland Winterhawks fans, of course, every Red Wings fan is a Grand Rapids Griffins fan. If you have a chance to make any one of those playoff games, please do, especially Van Andel is just such a great bar, and Grand Rapids is amazing. Go watch those games. Awesome to see them make a run of it, and this is as close as we're going to get to Red Wings playoff content for this offseason. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back after, but first we want to let you know that this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching a hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for the Red Wings, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer and great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. Welcome back. Bad news for Alex Lyon. Good news for Trey Augustine. Alex Lyon and the cut he suffered to his hand have caused his World Championships to end early. He has flown home, of course, to rest and get that treated. So as we mentioned before, we hope that it's nothing too serious and that he can still prepare and be ready for the upcoming Red Wings season as he looks to, compete with Ville Husso for that starting job in Detroit, or at least contribute to a full season of 1A, 1B hockey for the Red Wings in net. Ideally, you have a better result than the Red Wings have had in previous seasons. And I mean, that has to start with Husso being healthy, but I digress. The good news is Trey Augustine is, according to Dave Fisher of USA Hockey, and this is from John Morosi, I grabbed it from Twitter, Trey Augustine is the youngest goalie in 90 years for Team USA at the World Championship. So that is a, well, I know we said this is a good opportunity for Augustine, but it's shaping up well for him lately.
He's just a baby.
And yet
here we are. I don't imagine he's going to get a ton of game action, but
I don't know. Nedeljkovic hasn't been the hottest, so.
Yeah, Team USA just looked at Red Wings goaltending the past 2 years and went, we want all of that. Give us all of that smoke.
Our friend Sean Shapiro posted this thought exercise, which I'm going to co-opt for this. If Team USA, leans on Augustine and he does great, does that change any internal conversations that the Red Wings are having with Augustine and their plans for him because his plans are to go back to MSU for his sophomore season. So do they look at Trey Augustine and say, hey, you can jump into this sooner?
How could they, would be my question. On talent alone, sure, you could understand that. I don't ever want to make any broad sweeping conclusions over a 2-week sample of anything. But you have Cossa, who's going to be taking the reins in Grand Rapids. Do you want Augustine to go to Grand Rapids and play 15, 20 games? Do you want Cossa to play only half of the games? You have this luxury of two really, really good young goalies. So the whole point here should be syncing the timelines a year or two apart. Augustine goes back to MSU. Cossa runs with it in Grand Rapids. If he has a great year, he goes up to Detroit. And then Augustine can come in and take over in Grand Rapids or get a bigger role, whatever. They could platoon him with a veteran like they did with Cossa this year. Or if Cossa says, maybe he's not ready for Detroit and he goes back to Grand Rapids another year, would that be the time to say, Augustine, you're only going to get 20 games this year, but it's going to be at the pro level. Let's see what you got. And obviously then at that point, Kossa's not a rookie. He'd have 2 years under his belt. You're probably pretty comfortable running with him as the quote-unquote vet in Grand Rapids. So I don't think this should change a damn thing about this upcoming season.
Fair enough. Okay, let's move on to our 2024 NHL Draft Prospect Profile. Hardly a surprise. We've talked about him a lot this episode already, but Michael Brandsegg-Nygard, the Norwegian who is, lighting up a lot of people's prospect discussions because he has a sweet last name, but also, as we've mentioned, one of the more well-rounded, if not one of the most well-rounded prospects in this draft class. Who is Michael Brandsegg-Nygard? Is he in Detroit's range? What kind of production has he had? And what would you think about the pick?
If you are in the camp that you believe the Red Wings have a type, you might want to start learning Norwegian. Because of everybody who's likely to be available in the range, this is the guy that checks every Red Wings box. Mega high compete, good skater, enough skill to, keep you intrigued. 200-foot game. Did I mention compete? Compete. He's got a lot of compete. High character guy. Everything the Red Wings would love. Much like the last two first picks the Red Wings made. Questions about what the ultimate offensive ceiling is. He's your quote-unquote safe pick of the first round, even though I hate using that phrase because the base is so good, you'd be surprised if he doesn't make it. But is he going to be Joe Veleno? Is he going to be Marco Kasper? Is he going to be Nate Danielson? Is he going to be something more? All those options are on the table. Now, he is a late birthday, which is worth noting because if you compare his stats this year, a good equivalent comparison would be Marco Kasper's draft plus 1 year. So the year after Detroit took him and he went back and played for Rögle in the SHL. Kasper's production that year was higher than Nygard's was this year, and Kasper's in the SHL. Nygard was in the Allsvenskan, so a lower level. So I understand the criticisms of the offense might not be there at the NHL level because even Kasper was only half point per game in the AHL this year. Both of them have room to grow, so it's not, the greatest example to give a whole lot of context because there's still a lot of question marks there. But it is worth keeping in mind. And he did have a big playoff production-wise. I think he was 10 points in 12 games or something like that. So, again, I don't like making conclusions off 2-3 week sample sizes, but playoffs at a top level is not nothing.
Yeah, I really like the nuance you built into that. I think it's not just so simple as saying he has a low offensive ceiling, but there are those considerations you have to make. You can't ignore them. I do think his shot is really good. Like
yes.
He can score in different ways. It's not like you think of a grindy hustle type guys and they just score the, blue collar lunch pail goals right around the crease. No, he can shoot from distance too. And so I think that's a good aspect of his game that probably leads to more of the production that you think he could have. And yeah, you have to look at, smaller subsets of games where he's really shone. I'm curious to see how his next couple seasons go, which is irrelevant for this draft, but I'm wondering if you don't see him flourish then, because you're seeing some of the signs that he might. Regardless, though, I agree. His base, like you watch his game and you're like, yeah, there's no reason why he shouldn't be at least a middle six winger. And that's a really good result for a 15th overall pick. A guaranteed middle six winger, a lot of teams would say, yeah, I'll check that box every day of the week. Could he be a top six winger? I think it's within the range of possibilities. And if I think all of the, players with super high end abilities are gone before Nygard, I actually like the pick. It goes back to our discussion at the top of the show. I think you just have to be a little realistic about what might be there at 15, but he would be a good addition to the organization. And I do think that you're right, Brad, in saying you can't make a sweeping conclusion about his offense. There's still room to grow. You have to take those the comparables in his performance at certain ages and levels into consideration. And he's certainly not, telling you he's the highest end offensive player in the draft. But I think there's a chance there could be a little bit more there. So if Detroit walks away with Brandsegg-Nygard because they really love the guy, or he was just the most surefire, this guy will actually translate to the NHL player available at 15, I'm happy with it. That's why I like the player.
I mean, we've talked about these types of players at length over the past few years. He's got lots of pro qualities that will make him an NHL player. He's the type of guy with his current skill set that plays 10 plus seasons. He could be, a 60-point player. He could be a half-point player. He could be Michael Rasmussen. The range is all over the place, but the guaranteed thing is he'll play a long time in the NHL given how he plays the game. That's how I feel about him. We've talked about this before. I think he's got a better shot than what people are giving him credit for. He can score off one-timers, wrist shots, slap shots, so that can translate up a level. You know what? When you watch prospects, you try and get excited about what you see, and the compete is obviously there. He'll blow guys up. But you know what? It's just not doing it for me with Brandsegg-Nygard. But I can see why people would love him.
I think it's a question of, he's going to be categorized with guys who, not all of these guys will fall, but they could. You think of Cole Yzerman, who we talked about last episode. You think of Seneca. You think of Catton. And maybe all three of them are gone, but if they fall, which they could, you have to evaluate him against them. Is he more of a surefire NHLer than those guys? The answer is probably yes for most people. Is he the highest ceiling player out of those guys? The answer is probably no for most people. So again, you have to take the risk into that calculation.
Yeah, if you're sitting there and you're Steve Yzerman, and in your mind you go, I really think Nygard is going to be a middle six winger, and I think he's going to be a good middle six winger. And let's say Beckett Seneke falls, and you're sitting there going, I think that guy's got a chance to be a pretty good top six winger. You got to take Seneke. That's kind of where I'm at. Is if now this is all muted by the fact if you go, oh no, I think that offensive ceiling for Nygard is way higher. I think he's going to be. Then by all means, take him. It's you have to be pretty confident that it's going to be there. Now, that being said, Seneke, Yzerman, Catton, they're all off the board. Yeah, go nuts. You're probably going to be hard-pressed to do better than Nygard if you're talking ceiling or floor. at that pick, right?
Yeah. There's a couple guys in there, but yeah.
Yeah, like there's always the guy that just improves beyond anybody's reasonable expectation after they get drafted. It happens every year. But from what we know now, yeah, like I said, there's this top 12, 13 range of guys that the ceiling could be pretty good. And then you got a lot of guys where it's not there. It's not going to be there. And I think of that tier, Nygard's probably at the top.
Based on where Detroit's drafting and the kind of player Michael Brandsegg-Nygard is, even though he is not a polarizing player in his game or a person, he is going to be one of the most polarizing prospects because people are either going to be very hard against drafting another player in the, Kasper mold, or they're going to say you're lumping him in with or you're holding back his offensive ceiling too much in your mind that there's actually more to him. So I think it's going to be an interesting discussion on him and probably a little overblown.
I personally believe he does have higher offensive upside, given the fact that I really think his shot is, in this draft class, good. It's just, this is the classic argument of floor versus potential.
Yeah.
To me, it is anyway. And I think the Red Wings already... Why stack your deck with more of the same thing? Why not bring in someone who offers another dynamic to how your draft strategy plays out? You know what? If they end up taking Brandsegg-Nygard, great. The Red Wings clearly know what they're doing with those types of players, so by all means, take another one. But if there's somebody with super high potential and they take them too, I really feel like that's a better go this draft.
Okay. Let's jump into NHL news, our final segment before we jump into overtime, and let's start with the playoffs. Florida, Boston, the New Rats versus the team that nobody else in the league cries for, but they do say, well, maybe they had a case with that whole goalie interference debacle. Florida leads that series 3-2. The only thing we can wish for is that series goes to 7 games because everyone is just, like, Florida is just leaning so hard into their we are the new Rats behavior, and Boston is screaming, the refs, the video room, the refs again, and everyone's like, you expect us to care? But the hate has been hysterical to see.
Do you think they allowed the McAvoy goal because they were worried about physical violence from Boston if it was overturned?
I think if the goalie interference debate hadn't been raging from the previous call, which I think was wrong, I actually think that goal would have been overturned.
I was okay with that first one standing, but my issue with it was the standard that they have set is so baby soft. Why was that the one they changed it on?
Because their standard was he couldn't have made the save anyways, and we think
and I'm okay with that argument. I'm okay with that standard, but that's not what they've been calling.
And that's not what the rule says.
Yeah, that was the one where if you go by Down Goes Brown's model of what are they actually going to call not, that one should have been disallowed based on the already set standard, which I agree with. All the other garbage they've waved off that should, in my mind, be allowed in the rule book, this falls into that category. Like, that should have been waved off because that is the standard this league has set. And for all the same reasons, that's why I'm okay that the McAvoy one stood. Because Bobrovsky had time to set, but the most important thing on that one was the contact, the feet outside of the blue. Everybody, it's the simplest way to ever check if goalie interference is going to stand. Are you in the blue or are you not?
The Boston fans were also extremely mad because, the Marchand hit that he took from Bennett initially looked like a hit where he just went down, and then obviously he missed the next game, and he was saying he got suckered, and the NHL was like, well, we reviewed it and we saw nothing. And then the Boston players were like, no, he took a punch. And then it was, I think Emily Kaplan reported, the NHL didn't see this new reverse angle that I think TNT put out until Sunday, but it didn't change how player safety saw it, not as a sucker punch, but as a hockey player with 2 players engaged. Essentially what happened is Bennett hit Marchand and masked a little punch to the face / side of the head in the process. There was a whole Bennett is protecting his other hand. No, he was punching him in the face, man. He was punching him in the head. That's the dirty stuff that happens in playoff hockey. butt ends, elbows, shots and scrums where refs can't see it. He put the wool over their eyes, but he absolutely did so.
Yeah, and everything about this situation, it's almost impressive how the Department of Player Safety finds new ways to prove how bad they are at their job.
But I don't think that one deserved like a suspension or anything.
You sucker punch a guy in the jaw and knock him out for a couple games. Yeah, that's a suspension all day, every day. We've seen suckers get suspended
like
before.
Dylan Larkin.
We're getting to Dylan Larkin. Don't worry. But by their standards, I don't think that's a suspension though.
Dylan Larkin literally got suspended for it.
It's how sneaky he was though. I don't think the player. I agree with you. I don't think player safety actually made the evaluation that it doesn't change their mind. I think they just weren't going to change their mind based on a new angle because of being embarrassed.
1,000%. 1,000%. That's all it was. Because again, the NHL's big on standards and precedent. This play has been suspended before. Full stop. It wasn't. Was it because they didn't have the angle, or was it they were scared to make the call in the playoffs?
If it was penalized in the game, then it's a different story.
It's crazy to me to think back that Sam Bennett couldn't even do a push-up at the NHL Draft Combine.
Wasn't it a pull-up?
What did I say?
Push-up.
Yeah, whatever.
Those are vastly different.
One's a pull, one's a push. Whatever. He couldn't do one of them.
Hey, how's the gym going for you?
Terrible. So's the golf game. And now he's just runs guys over, does cheap shit. Like it truly is amazing that just the transformation he's gone through.
Boston fan, I will say, like, I think, and Boston fans are like, that one goal changed the course of that game. It changed the course of the series. Florida is now up 3-1. Boston did make it 3-2, but I understand, and they got vastly outplayed, mind you, but if we were in their position, we'd be screaming bloody murder too. But it's very funny watching the rest of the NHL and their fans go, sucks. Win some games. This is fun to watch.
You hate to see it.
Yeah. It's not Boy Who Cried Wolf. It's not the same story, but you have the same feeling towards the boy. That's Boston, Florida. Swayman hasn't looked perfect, but in the games where he's looked on, that guy is a dog. Like the second Boston win that just happened, he made some clutch saves. The only performance that was better was Jim Montgomery's acting on the bench.
Oh my God, phenomenal. The coaches are the real MVPs of that series.
Truly, truly are. Changed penalty calls standards, altering in the playoffs was old news. Now it's changed goalie interference standards. You love to see it from the NHL. Edmonton, Vancouver. That series is 2-2 thanks to some late game heroics from Evan Bouchard. But the topic of conversation for a lot of the week was the scrum at the end of the game where Vancouver went up 2-1, wherein McDavid /Soucy, and they were kind of trading shots. And then as Soucy went to go cross-check McDavid, Nikita Zadorov, all-time guy in this league. I have so much time for Nikita Zadorov. I've said before, I wish he was a Red Wing. Just like the vibes through the roof for him. Came in and cross-checked McDavid in the lower back. McDavid fell, and then Soucy's cross-check caught McDavid in like the neck jaw, which was bad. And not what Soucy was trying to do, but everyone saw that and went, ooh. And Vancouver fans were immediately, what about the high stick on Hughes? What about he slashed him first? Look, I'm sorry, I don't care if it was a two-hander. Is a two-hander to the shin pads not the same as a cross-check to the mouth, right?
Oh, you mean he slashed him like every other player slashes every other NHL player 1,000 times in a game? Like, get bent.
But you got to talk about Zadorov's quote.
No, hold on. We'll get to that. I got to talk about what the elephant in the room with every Red Wings fan right now. So Soucy gets 1 game suspension for this.
Yes.
Have we seen a near identical play like this before where a guy gets hit and then another guy accidentally catches him in the face, neck, whatever, resulting in bad things? I feel like we've seen this before, and that one wasn't suspended because the Department of Player Safety is bad at their job. Gotta hate this league. Best sport, worst league.
Well, they've never seen it before. This is the first time.
And it's a great point, guys, because the whole Parker Kelly, Matthew Joseph situation was exactly that. I don't want to hear about Morgan Rielly. It's not the same play. Shut up about Morgan Rielly. You're losing your damn minds. It's not the same. It is the same. You're right, Brad. as the Parker Kelly Matthew Joseph situation.
Yes. Did Matthew Joseph mean to get him in the head? No. Did Dylan Larkin get lower at the point of impact because of what Parker Kelly did? Yes. Did Carson Soucy mean to cross-check McDavid in the face, head, whatever? No. Was he lower at point of impact because something his teammate did? Yes. It's the culmination of events that led to in McDavid's case, no injury, thankfully, but in Larkin's case, getting knocked unconscious. Like, if they had fined Zadorov $5,000 and Soucy $5,000 as like you both screwed up, we're going to slap you with this, or suspended Soucy and gave Zadorov nothing, so Zadorov feels guilty about getting his buddy suspended, I'm also fine with that. I am A-okay with how the NHL handled the Soucy incident. It just makes me even angrier about the Larkin situation.
Yeah, and it's complicated because what do you do? Like, who do you penalize there? Zadorov for coming in and cross-checking a guy in the back who's engaged with someone else? Maybe because it results in an injury, but then you're like, that happens 100,000 times a game. We're going to start to suspend that. And then do you suspend Soucy for something that was very obviously, like, he was trying to cross-check him, but not like that? It's tough. And do
you fine Connor McDavid for embellishment and diving? That's always on the...
Do you think he dropped easy?
I don't know.
Evan's just
all
this
possibilities.
Fire's not big enough.
We can't eliminate all possibilities.
I actually see an outcome where no one gets suspended. I agree, and you're like, I can see the justification. I think they landed within the zone of this is an acceptable outcome on this one, but it's not black and white. But I agree. It pisses you off because you're like, there was a worse outcome for the Red Wings, but because it's Dylan Larkin and the Red Wings, and as Nikita Zadorov said, apparently doesn't draw enough money to the game, the NHL did the right thing by saying, hey, the best player on the planet cannot get cross-checked in the teeth and nothing happens. Just by standard, I don't care what you think about the rules, we can't let that happen.
But what about the best player on an original 16 in a huge market?
I truly appreciate that you guys still get angry at the Department of Player Safety. It's admirable. A little pathetic.
Pathetic, absolutely. But is it
an hour in before Evan calls this pathetic for the first time this episode? That's a new record.
Pathetic, yes. But is it the same shit over and over again? Also, yes. Is it new and creative shit getting mixed in every once in a while that pisses off? Also, yes. Like, it's just truly a never-ending content stream of incompetence.
Anyhow, Nikita Zadorov, whether he was right or wrong, sounding off on the NHL saying, would that call have been made elsewhere? I guess not, because, we don't make enough money for the league or whatever it was.
He's right.
They're protecting their investment or something like that. Yeah,
would that get called
elsewhere? See if I can find it.
He's correct because it didn't.
He's right. I think the league's right for doing it, and he's hilarious for calling it out. I love that guy, man. Wearing 91, going out throwing big hits, like taunting the other team. He is such a dude. And I'll say this until the next time he trucks a Red Wings player, which will happen, but
he got literally suspended for trucking a Red Wings player this year.
Yeah. And then what did he say?
He's like, that was bad. My bad.
It was a bad hit. I wasn't trying to do it, but I caught him high and I have to be responsible for my body. I was like, can we have more of this guy? It's not a surprise that Vancouver fans are now all in on Zadorov and they don't want to pay Hronek what he wants. Which, just a little bit of like, okay, thankfully we're all back to reality because Filip Hronek's a good hockey player. He's a very good hockey player. The Red Wings made a tough but calculated decision to move him when they did because at the time they were looking down the barrel of, we're going to have to pay him a big contract and we don't necessarily think he's worth that, but based on how players are paid for his position and their production, he's having a career year with us. And so they went out and made a trade that ultimately got them Axel Sandin Pellikka. But because Vancouver's on this run, there's been a growing chorus of Detroit messed up and, they should have kept him and this was such a big mistake. He is not, the second coming of whatever great right-handed defenseman. He's a really good defenseman. He's done well in Vancouver. He's worth a lot of money.
He's not an $8 million defenseman, which is what he might get paid.
And now Vancouver has to make that decision. They have a really good player who's helping them, who's done great with Hughes. Absolutely. But let's not... The balance and calculation of this trade is still the exact same as when it was made. Like, it hasn't changed at all. I don't want to disparage Filip Hronek. Really like the guy. Want to see him succeed. But nothing has changed from the moment Steve Yzerman pulled the trigger on that trade, and now we're getting closer to the moment of reckoning. And he's not had a good playoffs for Vancouver. Okay. That series, if anyone is is due for 7 games. I hope it's that one. It's funny because the last episode I was like, oh, Skinner, maybe they could still win with him. And then you look at the stats and it turns out he was actually it was just untenable with him. So that was wrong. But they have Pickard in. Yes, that Pickard. And what's Edmonton going to do, man? They're going to build a wall around him for the rest of the playoffs?
It's the only way they win a cup is they need to allow 20 or less shots a game.
Colorado, Dallas. The obvious talking point in that one is Val Nichushkin for the second straight time has failed a drug test, this time because of the phases of the player assistance program. He is suspended for 6 months without pay before he's even eligible for reinstatement. I mean, this story is what it is at this point. It's sad because of the substance use disorder. His teammates also are very disappointed. You can see from their quotes that this has happened again. It's a big blow to Colorado in this series too. So first and foremost, you hope that for his sake and his family's sake, especially that, for the person this turns around, and that goes without saying, but to flip to the less important thing, the series for Colorado, they are now looking down the barrel of 3-1 against Dallas. And based on how Colorado took it to Dallas for those first couple of games, people would be a little bit surprised. I mean, they are playing in about 45 minutes here, so maybe by the time you listen, there's a result that renders all of this moot. But that's a tough blow for Colorado.
It is. It could be. Tonight could be, do I say life-changing for the Stars if they can close out Colorado? Because we've been talking about this gauntlet that they have to go through in order to win a Stanley Cup. Man, getting a few extra days off before going into a conference final against Vancouver or Edmonton, that would be massive, massive for them. So I wouldn't be surprised if Dallas has an extra little bit of pep in their step going into the game tonight. Although I think I did see something right before we start recording that Rope Hintz is out tonight.
Which is a massive hit to that team.
Yes.
They have to lean on one Wyatt a little bit more. And then do you think Carolina can do it? 3-2 right now. It wasn't like the Rangers earned the 3-0. Don't get me wrong. But that wasn't a 3-0 series the same way it was versus Washington when they eventually swept them. So it wasn't exactly a surprise that Carolina took 2 games. Do you think they could do it?
Do I think Carolina can beat the Rangers twice in a row? I don't know. It's been a while since they've done that.
Okay, but Brad, 4 times in a row.
It's just look at it as 2 4-game segments. No. Could they do it? Yeah. They're already halfway there. Do I think the Rangers could absolutely lay the smackdown and knock him out next game? Also, yes, it's the playoffs. Who knows? The difference is right now, and if you want to talk about it from a mentality standpoint, Carolina's in a better spot mentally because they got nothing to lose. The Rangers are the ones now staring down blowing a 3-0 lead, which puts a ton of pressure. Nobody wants to lose a series. But nobody wants to be one of the very, very few teams to blow a 3-0 lead. So, if there is a game 7 between these two, the pressure on them is not equal.
All right, one final thought. The coaching carousel continues. Berube, I think, is the one who has, unsurprisingly, emerged as a potential favorite in Toronto, but nothing has really settled yet. You're going to see a flurry of those people move around. And even in Winnipeg, where it looked like Arneal was the de facto next guy up for the head coaching job there, I think they're now exploring. So I know we talk a lot about, the same coaches being, circled around in the carousel of the old guys and whatever it might be, but there are actually quite a few up and coming coaches through the system that are potentially getting a chance here. So we'll see how all that one shakes out. Obviously not relevant to Detroit right now, but still of note for league news. Okay. Let's jump into overtime here on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Overtime is brought to you by Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. If you want to support the show, you get access to benefits like the Patreon exclusive Discord, the overtime bonus episodes, and the giveaways. And you allow us to do things like continuing to produce this show and make it bigger and better and run it through the off season. You allow us to produce Expected by Whom, who have a really great guest on their Friday morning episode. And you also allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation, as well as host Winged Wheel Podcast nights in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. Let's jump into questions from our patrons. Matt Speed says, Lions hand injury and Husso's injury record. Do these change Stevie's approach to the position between the pipes coming up to this next season?
Unless Lyon got nerve damage because the cut was so deep, I don't think that changes anything that he wouldn't have already been thinking.
Yeah, that last point. Like, if I'm not saying that there shouldn't be changes in net, I think that actually might be what's on Steve Yzerman's mind. But yeah, unless there's something more to the Lyon injury, it's already in place. If so,
I'll put it this way: if Yzerman's plan as of a week ago was to go into the season with Husso and Lyon, I have some questions because that is a position that needs to be upgraded either way. And it could work out. There is nothing available or affordable in an upgrade there, and this is what he ends up with next season, which, okay. But if it is the plan, I have concerns.
Give Wallman the Heart says it's not the hottest offseason topic for the Wings, so it hasn't gotten much discussion, but do you think Veleno will be on the Wings next season? I think I'd rather keep Fisher and give Veleno's spot to Kasper or Danielson.
Tie goes to the younger player. So go how far down the age bracket you want on that one.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's like a done deal that Veleno is going to be here and stay long term. Like you consider spots and cap space needing to be freed up. Veleno doesn't represent a ton of cap space, but the spots, he could be one of the guys that moves. Is he a good player in a depth role for this team? Yeah. And he's younger and could still improve, but he's not going to be driving any part of the top six, for example.
No, he's a good fourth line center who's probably not going to cost a lot because he's an RFA, so he doesn't hold the hammer in contract negotiations right here. And when he eventually gets to arbitration, as of right now, he's not going to have much of a leg to stand on there. So I like Joe Veleno. I think he can moonlight as a third line center and hell, he's hung around as a first line center through injuries and not looked horrendously out of place. But if you can re-sign him cheap and plug him in as your fourth line center, man, he could be your fourth line center in cup runs. Like, he's not a nobody.
Yeah. And obviously he's an RFA with ARB rights this offseason, so we'll see how that one plays out. Clint Bennett says, for the Shanna fans in the room, that being me, says, based on his history with the Leafs, would you want him to join in on a role with Yzerman, or with the flop that things have been in Toronto, do you just pass? So I'm going to qualify this by saying Brendan Shanahan is my favorite player of all time. And when he went to Toronto initially, like the hockey fan in me was genuinely brokenhearted. I was like, man, he's from Toronto. I think he was from, Mimico or Etobicoke, one of the two, which is just absorbed by Toronto. But you're like, I think of him as a Red Wing. Based on what we know of the personality types from what kind of gets circulated in league circles, I just don't see where Shanahan would fit in. The Shanahan already exists in the Red Wings organization, and that's Steve Yzerman. He's not going to come in if he leaves Toronto in a year, he's not going to come in a high-end role. Is he going to be a special advisor? I have a hard time seeing that after he ran the hockey branch of MLSE, which is a massive, massive role. It's the Cowboys of the NHL. It would do nothing other than to serve like the fanboy in me, but I don't really see the fit, so to speak.
He ran a team with three of the best young players in the NHL for 8 years and got one playoff series win out of it. Pass.
Jason Thompson says, who does Boston move? Vezina winner Ullmark or playoff thief Swayman? Who would Detroit have to give to even be in the conversation to get them?
Get this entire conversation right out of your head. Swayman is not going anywhere. The Bruins are keeping him. They already traded Ullmark once. He just wouldn't waive his no-move clause. And Ullmark only has 1 year left on his contract, and I don't think the Red Wings are going to give a crap about a rental at this point.
Yeah, you think about extensions and then maybe things change, but I mean, he would be a solution. I really like both goalies.
Do you think Ullmark, at his age, what an extension will likely cost, and then you put him behind Detroit's defense like it's going to go well?
Not as well as Boston.
Color me skeptical.
Just send McAvoy over with him.
Yeah, there you go. Problem solved.
That'd be great. Avery Sloppy Seconds says, my biggest regret in the Wings missing the playoffs stems from the fact that they would have played the Rangers in the first round. Not only would it have been an original six matchup, but the Wings and Rangers have not played in the playoffs since 1950. That's insane to me, and it would have been amazing to watch regardless of how short-lived of a series it likely would have been. Oh, the league office would have gone nuts for that one, those two teams.
We're not terribly far away from a original six conference final here.
That's fun.
If Boston can pull off the comeback and the Rangers finish off Carolina.
Well, speaking of the Rangers, we didn't even talk about Mark Messier's leadership award to Jacob Trouba.
Crisis League sucks so much. And I saw people, I tweeted something along those lines, and I saw people saying, Mark Messier just picks it. I'm like, yeah, statement still stands. What other goofy... I saw someone respond saying basically, can we have a Dominic Hasek award where he just picks like a goalie who does cool shit throughout the year? Like,
yes, we should.
We should absolutely have that award.
I'm okay if Mark Messier has this stupid-ass award, but I want 6 other guys to have the same style of award and just see how weird we can get.
I actually, I have no problem with it because Trouba is really well liked by the Rangers team, and I don't know what he does in the community, but I assume he's a good leader off the ice. The problem is he also leads with his elbow, which has nothing to do with the award.
Why are you not shocked Mark Messier picked him then? Mark Messier also led with his elbow.
My only true opinion that I actually feel strongly about is they should have just waited to see if the Rangers would play the Canucks in the Cup final, and they should have announced that during the Cup final just to ignite the most fury possible from Vancouver fans.
They could do that at a Vancouver home game too.
No.
Can you imagine?
Ryan, you're on the right track, but I think you picked the wrong answer.
Never has a city burned after a game 3, but they'll do it.
Self-immolate.
The funnier option. I like your thought of wait till the Cup final on the chance we have Rangers Canucks. But then have Mark Messier pick Quinn Hughes. The mental gymnastics that would go on online.
It's just 20,000 people doing the whole Larry David gif of like,
Do we like Mark Messier now? Do we hate Quinn Hughes? What? I don't know how to feel.
Oh, man. Okay, last question here from CNODS before we get into overtime says, in a more of a macro point of view, can you grade Yzerman's rebuild? I'm getting really caught up in the micro and seeing how far off his team still is. So broad strokes, how do we grade the rebuild? Honestly,
B minus?
I'm more positive than that because
that is a positive grade.
Oh, we had different standards in school.
I would take B's.
Are we talking high school or college? Because I had very different standards between those two.
Hey, what do they call a med student with C's? Doctor.
C's get degrees, buddy.
I wouldn't know.
But
somewhere my mom's really mad.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the overarching plan of what Yzerman's been doing has been successful. He's drafted really well in the first round relative to what he's been given, which is the biggest thing to turn around a rebuild. It sounds so stupid and simplistic, but if he was whiffing on the first round consistently, it sets rebuild back 5 years. Look what happened. Ken Holland kept whiffing in the first round, and that's why we're still here. I think Yzerman's made several very savvy trades. He's made a lot of gambles that some have paid off, some haven't, but when you're going to gamble a ton, you're going to lose on a few. It happens, and I'm okay with that mentality. I think the big flaw in the Yzer plan has been free agency. I think he's done overall a negative job in free agency. Not that he hasn't had good signings, but man, the Sherratts and the Kops and the Confers and the Holes.
I really hate when you list Confer in there. I think he's.
I like him, but it's this overarching dollar figure and year figure of guys who don't make a huge impact. If you could, would you get rid of JT Compher to get rid of Andrew Kopp's contract?
No. Well, I answered before I heard the second part.
Exactly. So, I like Compher, but he's had this philosophy and this type. We talk about his type in the draft, but he's had the same type in free agency, and that has bit him in the ass royally to this point. To the point now we're going to have a full summer of conversations of who do we buy out? How do we unload this contract? How do we get rid of this player? Can we afford this guy because of these contracts? That is the part of the Yzer plan where I think he has failed. But overall, on the more important parts, i.e. drafting, development, and trades, he's done well.
Okay, I agree with pretty much from start to finish almost everything you said up until listing free agency in terms of has he failed or succeeded. I agree that the free agency has been the weak spot for Yzerman's rebuild so far. Fully agree on all of it. I think, the most generous interpretation of a lot of the contracts is these guys can contribute in certain roles, maybe less than what we thought, but they're just overpaid on dollar and term. But if you're looking broad strokes, to me, those are still snags and missteps, which are normal in a rebuild because it'll never be fully perfect. And it's not as if in 3 years, we won't be looking back and saying, oh, in the end, it all worked out. So I'm not like preemptively assigning praise to Yzerman for that, but I'm just saying if you're looking broad strokes, he has done the crucial stuff right, which is what you pointed out, which is he drafted the core, even though he didn't have the first, the second, or the third overall pick, more than once. He did it with Seider, he did it with Raymond, and I'll bet he'll get at least one other one between Edvinsson, Danielson, Sandin Pellikka, or otherwise.
Yeah, like you look at his first rounds of what was available to him. Raymond looks like best case scenario. Seider, definitely best case scenario. Edvinsson, looking pretty good. Kasper, sure, he's still out. Didn't love the Cossa trade, but Cossa still looks very, very good. And Danielson looks like it's working out really well. And Sandin Pellikka's turning out really well. What more could he have done with what he was dealt? And I think that's the biggest thing. And a lot of these guys, they're developing them well. We're getting to the point of over-ripening on a few of them, but that's okay. We'll figure that out this season. And yeah, but like to me, an A+ grade, that's like damn near perfect. Like,
oh, you can't be assigning that right now.
Exactly. So like the free agency bumps it from an A to a B because yeah, it wasn't one or two missteps. There were a lot of significant missteps on that front, which is why I land where I do. So it's still an overall very positive view of what he's been able to do. But the flaw, unfortunately, in at least 3 instances, has been fairly significant.
The good news is the missteps are in. If you're going to have the misstep in a certain category, it's the one that you can fix. You can't go back in time and draft different players.
Yeah, exactly.
You can move contracts around and things like that. Yeah. So, okay, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. Thank you to Labatt Blue Light for sponsoring the Winged Wheel Podcast. Go grab a Labatt Blue Light and enjoy it with the next episode. Thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. We could not do this without you. And to all of our listeners, new and old, we really, really appreciate you. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to join the Dub Club and support the show. But if Patreon's not for you, something you could do is give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or otherwise. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and tell a friend. It's a big help. And to all of our name level supporters on Patreon, we can't thank you enough. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Victor Zetterberg, Brad, Ryan, I'm swallowing, Hannah, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Keenan O'Donohue, Yanni Burgers, Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. at the Cheesebag Navy, Avery Sloppy Seconds, Beep, Carl Bertanen Analuski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Seider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, Seider, Dixon. You guys keep trying to get me with that. Brand new name level supporter. Welcome to the Dub Club. Good try. I got you this time. DJ Denton, God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose, Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gillum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Joel Miranda, Jonathan Miller, Kalen, Wood, Marcus, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Ryan, 50, Hannah, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Scree and Lube, Stoli 7, Wingnut, That's What I Appreciates About You, Utah, Storm and Mormons, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iserplan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, AB, Adam Rose, Axel, Sandy Pellikka, Bellingham Acid Balls, Brad Simmons, Chi-Town Wings fan, Chimkim Nuggets, love the name, brand new name level supporter, welcome to the Dub Club and thanks for supporting the show, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarp Lagoon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Layton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsuk's Dirty Deke, Eric Nance, Evans, Fourth Putt, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans, Derogatory, John Ingalls, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Known Petrie Truther, the Mexinadian, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Michigan Boy in Avs Country, Norris Sider, Ophelia, Red Wing Tar Heel, Reed, Salt Lake Sugar Girly, Sean Mason, Steven, the Hodag, the Hat 123. This episode is sponsored by Twisters, Tom Iserplan Respecter, Throw the Road Puss, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you Sunday.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.